Welcome to Living Legacy Conversations. I'm your host, Bril Barrett, and today joining me will be Miss Peggy Sutton, representing the Tommy Sutton School of Dance, which is also known by most people, or everybody actually, as Mayfair Academy. I wanted to start doing these series of conversations because I realized that all the dancers I came across with in my everyday life, especially if they were from Chicago, those tap dancers had certain names in common. And Sammy Dyer was one of those names. Tommy Sutton was one of those names. And Jimmy Payne Sr. was one of those names. So I realized we as a tap community should know more about these masters who were based in Chicago and who are responsible for the resurgence, I think, of tap dancers coming out of the city of Chicago. So I'm gonna turn my attention to you, Miss Tommy Sutton, Miss Peggy Sutton, representing the Tommy Sutton legacy. So yeah, all I know is the name Tommy Sutton comes up. If you're talking tap in Chicago, at some point the name Tommy Sutton comes up. But when I read books, history books about tap dance, they all talk about, of course, Harlem and the Hoofers and all of that stuff. And many of them talk about LA because of Hollywood and the movies. But not many, I don't think any really mention Chicago and the tap scene and the tap masters that made sure that we all would have this art form. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your dad, Mr. Tommy Sutton. What was it like just being, let's start with at home. What was it like just growing up with, because he was just dad for you, I'm sure. The rest of the world was like.
He was dad, but I, literally grew up in a tap house.
Okay.
My whole life has been centered around tap dance.
Okay.
Because that's what he did and that's what we did.
Okay. Was it like pressure? Like, I want all my children to tap?
Not at
all. Or
all.
it was just, that's what we do in this house?
That's just what we do. That's just what we do in the house. That's, that was the family business. That's what we do outside of the house because, of course, we went to a lot of shows. I went with him to teach like a lot of private lessons. So tap was just a part of our lives.
Okay. And do you know how he got into tap?
I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I think, probably maybe in the 30s, early 40s, there were a lot of hoofers, and they were like street dancers, street tap dancers, and they would just get together and, tap and make these rhythms on the
steal from each
other. Exactly. And so I believe that's, how he's
That's how he got into it.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what I try to explain to a lot of people about the hoofers. The steps didn't have names. They were just dancing. And they were just enjoying it. And they were just picking it up and stealing from each other and all of those things. Did he always live in Chicago?
He was born in Brookhaven, Mississippi.
Oh, see, I did not know that.
And I'm not sure what age he moved to Chicago.
Okay.
But he was in Chicago, I know, for high school and beyond.
Okay. What high school did he go to?
Now you're putting me on the spot.
I'm just curious.
I'm wanting to say DuSable, but don't quote me on that.
Okay, cool. And so, again, you all grew up in a household of tap. So how many people were in this household? What was that?
My mother, my father, and my sister. I have an older sister.
Okay.
So the four of us.
Okay.
Yes.
So did y'all actually ever go out as a family act, or was
no. Well, let me roll that back a little bit. Now, my mother was not a dancer per se.
Okay.
But when I was younger, we did a lot of times, my sister and I would dance with my father. So it would be the three of us.
Okay.
And it was called the Sutton Trio.
The Sutton Trio. See, I did not know this. I do need my notepad. I need to be taking notes.
Yes,
the Sutton Trio. Wow.
Yes.
Okay. And then about what ages were you all maybe
I would say I was maybe about 7, 8, 9. My sister's 3 years older than I am. So
okay.
Do the math. And at that time, like I said, I grew up in a tap dance family. We we danced a lot.
Okay.
So my father, of course, danced, but then as a studio and, as a group and with Mayfair, we danced probably, just about every weekend.
Just about every weekend.
At every imaginable place you can think of.
Okay. And what year or around the time did he found Mayfair?
Mayfair, as it is known today, was founded in 1957.
Okay.
And it started on 79th and what was then South Park, which is now King Drive.
King Drive,
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you said as it's known now, so there was a different name
there
or
was a Mayfair School of Dance that I really don't know that much about, which was probably in the maybe late 40s, early 50s, which was right off of the Midway. But I think he was in partnership with another dance studio.
Gotcha.
And I think it was primarily Caucasian.
Okay. Because I think, so that brings, so the question I've always had, I've always wondered what is the connection with the name Mayfair with
the
Tommy
story
Sutton?
The story goes, he needed a name and he dropped the telephone book and where it fell, it was Mayfair. That's the story that he's always told.
Because so many others are named, their schools are named after them. And so
exactly.
But drop the phone book and where it landed is where.
Yes.
That is very interesting. I'm learning so much. So the school starts and then you all are, it's a family business, and are you all the teachers, like?
Oh, no. When he started the school, I was 5. My sister was 8. My mother was the receptionist. I think my grandmother was the receptionist. And the reason that he started Mayfair was because he was teaching in a lot of different schools. And a lot of the schools were, downtown or in the suburbs even at the time. And so he realized at that point that there were not any quality dance schools for the children of his community.
Gotcha.
So that's why he started Mayfair.
Okay. That's very important to know. And then was the focus tap household, tap dancer, so the focus of the school was always tap, or?
Well, when it started off, it was tap because, he was the tap dancer. But, we had ballet, we had jazz, we had Afro-Cuban, we had ballroom dancing, so, there were other subjects.
So there was a lot of, but we just know tap was heavy into the heart of the school.
Yes, it was.
Okay, and then so some time passed and there's a school running, Mayfair, and the proper name is Mayfair.
The proper name was the Mayfair Academy of Fine Arts.
Mayfair Academy of Fine Arts.
Yes.
And
today it is the Mayfair Performing Company.
Okay, Mayfair Performing Company. And at the Mayfair Academy of Fine Arts, you start to get students, and then so how long, or maybe not how long, but I'm just wondering what kind of prompted Mr. Sutton to create this book, this volume of tap exercises?
Well, he started off, he did a lot of private lessons. A lot. And a lot of master classes, workshops. So in that process, he put together a system to teach teachers how to teach tap. And so that's how this evolved with the exercise system. So even, when I first started, we started with exercise 1, exercise 2. In fact, the very first studio we had, on the wall were the steps of, painted on the wall. Were the steps in exercise number 1. So I think he had this in his head for a long time, but it was quite a while before he actually wrote the book. So you're saying Mayfair started in 1957. He didn't write this book until 1986, and actually when he wrote the book, he had retired. Semi-retired.
Gotcha. Interesting. And then the reason I ask that is because I travel a lot myself as a tap dancer, and everywhere I go, when I say Chicago, somebody will start doing exercise 1 and say, "Do you know this?" Because and that's one of the things we associate in Chicago, we associated with Tommy Sutton.
Right.
But outside of Chicago, they associate exercises 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever with Chicago.
Okay.
So when I say like
okay,
I'm from
okay.
Chicago, people will go, "Oh, do you know exercise 1?"
Yeah,
I've
that's
never said
interesting.
who I study with. I just say
Okay,
Chicago.
very good.
So it's and I remember meeting Karen Calloway Williams.
Yes, yes,
And she's
yes.
from Atlanta. And I
Yes.
remember being somewhere and I said, I'm from Chicago. And she's like, oh, yeah, I studied with Tommy Sutton. Do you know
Right.
exercise 1? And I was like, well, at that
Exactly.
time I did know it from my work with my partner at the time, Martin Trey Dumas III. But I just was like, wow. So Atlanta, when did that happen? And
Well, he retired in, I'd say, maybe 1979,
okay.
which incidentally is like 40 years ago.
That's true. This is 2019.
Okay. So he retired. He moved to Atlanta, and he taught there for a while. He taught at Spelman College for a while. I
Okay.
think he taught at Clark Atlanta
Okay.
also, and he did a lot of master classes, a lot of traveling when he was in Atlanta.
Okay.
And then he decided that he was actually going to write the book that he always wanted to.
Okay.
And it's really a guide for tap instructors.
Yeah, and that I never knew. I always thought it was for the students,
Yeah,
but it's
yes,
to teach
yes.
teachers how to teach
How
tap.
to teach.
And that's important because, yeah, there's a...
So
there's
his basic premise is that there are 12 basic steps, and that's what the exercises are based off of.
perfecting those. Yeah, that is literally the definition of
Yes.
technique.
Yes, exactly.
Because I meet people all the time. Oh, I've been tapping for 20 years. All right, let me see. Oh, is that a shuffle you just did? I'm not sure. Because you got to master those steps.
Right.
And that is your
right,
technique.
Right.
Interesting. So I think what we're going to do now is probably we're going to throw to a little demonstration.
All right.
We've been talking about the exercise and talking about Mr. Sutton and the different, the reasoning or the methodology behind. Again, I'm teaching for teachers. I love that. So exercises 1 and 2 are often done together. Now, is there a reason for that? I'm just curious.
I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I'm not. They're short,
Because they-
so
okay.
that might be
Okay.
it. That they just put them together. Then this is one thing I just thought about. A studio is only a certain size, and so the exercise 1 and 2 they travel.
Okay.
So you travel up so far, and then you turn around and you travel,
travel back.
and you turn around and come back up. So maybe put them together for that reason. I'm not really sure.
Okay. And so to this very day, if you go to the Mayfair Performing Arts Company,
The Mayfair Performing Company. Yes.
you're still going to see exercises 1 and
1,
2
2, and 3.
and 3 being
Yes,
done. And I
yes.
love that. That, again, is the definition of legacy.
Yes.
And so right now, we are about to throw to a demonstration of some of your students and teachers doing exercises 1 and 2 and 3. But first, we're just going to do exercises 1 and 2. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Tommy Sutton's exercise 1 and 2. Welcome back to Living Legacy Conversations, where we have been having the most wonderful conversation with Miss Peggy Sutton. And we're going to continue that conversation. So I think in this segment, we just saw exercises 1 and 2. And actually during the break, I can tell people, we can let people in on this. We were having that conversation about, I asked you what the difference is between doubles and flaps. And you said you walk your flaps and you run your doubles.
And you run your doubles, yes.
And then I know when I teach walking flaps and running flaps. So it's always, and that's another thing with my travels, tap steps all have different names depending on where you go. Usually though, one of the things that I've gotten familiar with is that usually you can tell geographically by what something is called where people are from, or and then especially if you go back to whatever masters may have ended up there from. So, but I noticed in Chicago, we have, even within the similarities, there's also very strong differences. And so, and I just realized that right now. So, and then again, that's that word of mouth thing. I think in the beginning of the dance, people were just making stuff up as they went along.
Sure.
They didn't even have names. Other people came along and said, "Oh, what do you call that?"
Exactly.
So I think I want to talk about again those similarities. So there's these other names that are synonymous with tap in Chicago. And I guess I want to just throw out some names, and you can tell me if there was a connection between your father and these other names. So first, I'm going to start with the Bruce sisters, Sadie and Mary Bruce.
Yes. There was definitely a connection.
Okay.
I believe that he taught for them.
Okay.
Maybe took classes from them.
Okay.
I don't recall ever personally meeting them, or if so, I was very young. But I do remember those names very much so, the Bruce sisters, yes.
Yeah, well, and I know the first time step I learned was a Sadie Bruce time step.
Okay.
So I knew her as the namesake of a step before I realized that she was a person. And then she had a sister, and they had a school. And so, and then what about Sammy Dyer?
Sammy Dyer, my father and Sammy Dyer were good friends.
Okay.
Sammy Dyer being older at the time, but of course you know the history of Sammy Dyer and you know all he did as a dancer. But then when he started his school in Chicago, you know, I think he was the kind of forebearer of others to come. And I remember as a child going to all the shows. And you know, going to see Sammy Dyer.
And I love hearing that support too. Like you know, because people don't always talk about that.
Well, there is a myth, and it is just a very urban tap myth.
Come on
that
now.
There is
Speak on it.
that there was always some tension or you know, issues between Sammy Dyer and Mayfair. And I never knew of that. And that, if so, that was never anything that my father or Sammy Dyer adhered to. So.
Yeah, and that's, it's just weird that because I've always heard about that too, but I never experienced it when I was at Sammy Dyer. Like you know, so I'm like, so where does all this come from? So it's good, and especially, and I think my company, I think Mad Rhythms puts me in a good place to have a different perspective, because myself and Trey Dumas started Mad Rhythms. So I always say Mad Rhythms has the legacy of Sammy Dyer and Tommy Sutton in it together. So yeah, so let's see, Jimmy Payne Sr.
Jimmy Payne Sr. Also, you know, was very good friends with my father. I'm not really sure of the connection. I didn't really meet Jimmy Payne, or that I can remember, until he was older. You know, I was probably a very young adult at that time, but my father did a lot of workshops, conventions, adjudications, and so I think Jimmy Payne, you know, was also involved. And then I do recall, and I can't remember right now which dance organization it was, but one of the larger ones that they honored both Jimmy Payne and my father. So I do recall that.
And I did notice you're probably one of the only other people I've talked to that says that I've heard say that in your school you had, when you listed the dance forms, what all did you list? When your father, all the dance forms that were
Tap,
offered
ballet, Afro-Cuban.
Afro-Cuban.
Afro-Cuban,
Now,
yes.
was that a thing? Because of course I know that Jimmy Payne Sr. was deep in the Afro-Cuban thing, and
I think like in the 50s and the 60s, it was a thing.
that was a thing. Okay,
It was a thing.
I'm like,
I'm not really
now I'm
sure,
hearing this.
but
Okay.
you know, it was, I guess, a mix of African and Cuban.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The Afro-Cuban stuff.
Yeah,
I love it. I
yeah.
love it. What about Bobby Ephraim?
Bobby Ephraim was a phenomenal tap dancer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll put it this way: he had phenomenal feet.
Okay.
And you know, my father, of course, introduced me to him.
Okay.
And at the time, I had just never seen anything like it
Okay.
because he could just tap, you know, seamlessly and for long periods of time,
Okay.
just without a break.
Okay. Wow.
And it was just amazing to me. He was, you know, didn't really talk a lot. You know,
Okay.
he wasn't like a big personality,
Uh-huh.
but his feet, you know, did the talking for him. So yeah, he was good.
And I will note that Muriel Foster from the Sammy Dyer School of Theater, when I mentioned the name Bobby Ephraim, she had a very, almost an identical response into how great he was and his feet and those things. So, and again, that's a dancer I've never heard anybody outside of Chicago talk about.
And it's just really so unfortunate that we don't have, you know, those memories captured some kind of way. Because, of course, this was a while back, and, you know, before video and all that, you know, you actually had to film it. But, you know, there were some phenomenal dancers that, you know.
Are there any other dancers that you can think of that might have worked a lot with your father or your father worked with that maybe the general public doesn't really know
Step
about?
Brothers.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
See,
Step Brothers.
do tell.
Do you know the
Do
Step
tell.
Brothers? Do
Yeah,
you know
I
about
know
the Step
of
Brothers?
them. I've seen footage.
I mean, they were just, you know, great dancers. And I don't know their history because remember, you know, I was a young child.
Right.
And so I just, that's how I grew up, just being around these people. And, you know, we'd go to their houses or we'd go to rehearsals or whatever the situation was. But I do know that they were just phenomenal dancers. And I think, for some reason, I'm thinking that maybe they might have performed more outside of Chicago.
Okay.
But I really don't know exactly where.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Let me see. Who else can I think of? Who comes to mind?
Now, you know who I'm thinking about, and I'm not really even sure if he was a tap dancer, but I'm thinking Finest Henderson.
That's the other name I've been trying to get at. Finest Henderson, yes.
Because I knew his son, who was just a personality, you know, larger than life personality. But I'm pretty sure that his father was a tap dancer.
Yeah.
I don't know that much about him.
He was, and again, I don't know a lot about him, but I knew there was a picture of Finest Henderson on the wall at Sammy Dyer. So I remember when I was a kid seeing like Finest Henderson, and I was like, well, who is this guy? And so there was a connection there. And then you just mentioned them, so that is.
There's a lot of connection between Mayfair and Sammy Dyer.
Exactly. So I think, that there's a project coming somewhere. I don't know what. I don't know how.
Very good.
But we're starting because you're going to teach me exercises 1 and 2.
Yes, I am.
So that's where we're going to start.
Yes, I am. Okay, very good, very good.
So I think then that leads me into, so in Chicago, 61 years, are there any stories, maybe just performance-wise, that stick out in your mind about places that you all performed? Did you all perform any outside of Chicago as
a school?
Yeah, as a school.
Not really.
Okay.
You know, we might have done something, you know, maybe Indiana. Wisconsin. But no, we didn't really, you know, go outside of the city as a school.
Okay. And then what about perhaps just notable performances in the city? Was it just, not just, but was it recitals every year, or were there?
It's a recital every year. At first, it was maybe every other year, and then it was
Okay.
every year. And then just performances any and every place.
Okay,
I
okay.
can't even tell you. On some maybe wonderful stages,
And
on
then
some
maybe some
stages
not
maybe
so.
this big, on carpet, on whatever, on grass, whatever,
Oh, so
that
you
kind
mean
of thing.
people even then were still trying to get people to tap dance on carpet?
Yes,
Oh,
they were.
see, I
Yes,
thought
they
that was
were.
a new
Yes, they
thing.
were. Yes, they
Every
were.
now and
Yes, they
then
were.
we get booked and people will say,
Exactly.
"Oh, we thought you could dance on this." I'm
Right.
like,
Did you
"What?"
really need a floor? Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
So,
okay.
we just danced wherever. But I must say that one thing that I kind of pride myself on, and of course I got this from my father, is that Mayfair, for their shows, really went for really big venues.
Okay.
Big professional venues. And sometimes it was kind of hard to get those venues. But, we've had shows at, Erie Crown, Medina Temple,
Okay.
Skyline Stage, now we're at the Harris Theater.
Okay.
I mean, just, really good venues that I felt that our kids should be exposed to, the Chicago Theater.
Okay.
And it goes on and on. But just letting our students know that, this city is theirs. Just as it is everybody else's.
Right, right. Well, and that's funny. You kind of beat me to my next
Okay.
question for you, because I was going to ask when I spoke with Ms. Foster regarding the Sammy Dyer School and even Jimmy Payne Jr. about the places they performed. First of all, everybody mentions the Medina Temple.
Medina Temple,
which
yes.
I think is that a Macy's or something now, or I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I know
It was a Macy's. I don't know what.
But
what
I
it is
remember
now.
performing
Yes,
at the
yes,
Medina
yes,
Temple
yes,
when I
yes.
was a kid with Sammy Dyer. And then I even heard, like Miss Foster was saying, that, who am I thinking of? Oh, that Sadie Bruce would put on shows at places like the Medina Temple and big places like
Okay,
that.
okay.
So it seems like that might have been like an undercurrent theme amongst maybe black-owned studios that we're going to showcase in the best of venues to show this
Right,
city
exactly.
what we have.
Right, and to just expose our children to
Yeah,
these venues,
yeah.
and let them know that they can dance at these venues
They can
just like
dance,
anybody
right,
else
right,
can.
exactly.
So-
Well, and I think that's beautiful, because again, you don't know it's possible until someone shows you that it's
Exactly,
possible.
exactly.
So I think that's beautiful. You said some of those venues were hard to get. What made them hard?
Well, sometimes when you would approach a venue and tell them that you were a dance school and you were coming in with, maybe 300-400 children of color, their response was maybe not as positive as
Okay.
you would like it to be. And so sometimes, just like anything else, you kind of had to keep knocking on that door and just doing things so that you can, you can get through that door.
Got you. That makes sense. And again, I'm glad that you all had the wherewithal to fight that fight so that these babies could benefit
Right.
from having access and exposure to those
Exactly.
spaces.
And that's one thing that my father really kind of instilled in me, is to think big. He was a big thinker.
Okay.
And he liked to do things in a big way. So, I kind of took that reign over.
Took that and ran with it.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think this would be a good time now to segue into the second performance that we're going to see
All right.
from some of your dancers representing Mayfair, and that is going to be Exercise 3.
Yes.
So, so again, 1 and 2 were kind of together because it was short, and then you also talked about the traveling of 1 and up.
Exactly.
What does 3 focus on?
3 focuses on heels.
Heels.
Heels. Flap heels, double heels, shuffle
Okay.
heels,
Okay.
heels. And he actually felt that exercise number 3 was the most important exercise.
Okay.
Because it kind of bridges between the beginner, intermediate, going into the more advanced.
Okay.
So exercise 3 is really based on heels.
Okay. All right.
You can understand.
Yeah, oh yeah. me and my heels are very familiar with the ground and the floor and the wood. So without further ado, this is Exercise 3 from Mr. Tommy Sutton. All right, welcome back to Living Legacy Conversations. I'm your host, Bril Barrett, and with me is the wonderful, effervescent Miss Peggy Sutton, representing Mayfair. So we've been talking a lot. We've talked about history. We've talked about relationships and connections. And I think in this last segment, I kind of want to talk about maybe the future. And it's funny, I'll start off with a story of my past to lead us into the future. So I know, as young dancers, we're always influenced by what's around us. Usually it's first and foremost our teachers. And so I remember as a dancer myself coming up, I always wanted to emulate whoever I was dancing with. When I studied with Carlton Smith, I wanted to dance just like Carlton Smith. Mr. Taps was the teacher that taught me about street performing because he was a street performer. He was in the subway. Ted Levy, now that was the stylist. He was a stylist all the way around. So, but I also think having more than one teacher, my style changed and evolved. But I think eventually the ultimate goal, which I didn't even know, was me finding my own style. So I don't even know how to define my own style, but I know when I first saw footage, some of the first footage I saw, when I was younger, Channel 7 would run these marathons. They were Fred Astaire marathons. And I remember, so I was tapping and I would see these Fred Astaire, and I would stay up late. I was getting in trouble for watching Fred Astaire movies. But I always, so I wanted to be smooth like Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire came off as like the ladies' man of dance. He was smooth. But I remember thinking, I want to be smooth like this, but I don't really want to tap like that. And that connection never happened. Then when Mr. Taps introduced me to footage, I saw like the Nicholas brothers and the Four Step brothers. Oh, I was head over heels. I was flipping and jumping off stuff, and my mom was mad that I saw that footage. So then acrobatic tap, that's what I wanted to be. So everything had like this, and then I remember at first I have a lot of respect for Bojangles. Because as a young black man in America, I wasn't always feeling like smiling. Then Gregory Hines came out. And he's in the movies in dress pants and a tank top and an earring and a little fro. And I'm like, I want to be like that. But then Gregory Hines did a movie about Bojangles. And I saw that and I was like, oh, there's a lot behind this smile. And so that's when I really started understanding that we have to look at our history and we have to know where it came from. We have to also always be trying to find our own style. And then of course Savion came out. And he was like a kid my age, listening to hip hop, wore baggy pants. And I was like, oh, I want to be that. I want to be that. And I remember I had a card made and I had Funk Tapper on my card. And
I like that.
Dormisha Sumbry Edwards, who was one of my contemporaries, saw that and was like, what is a funk tapper? Now, she studied with Savion and had been in, and she said, and I said, well, funk tapper, was because I dance to funk music. I'm funky with it. And she said, oh, so you're a tap dancer. And I'm like, well, but I did. She said, oh, no, so you're a tap dancer. And so that got me to thinking, and she challenged well, if you're a tap dancer, that's one thing, and then everything else are choices, the style that you choose. So I told that long story of my history just to kind of touch on what do you think was most, or how would you describe Tommy Sutton's style?
He was a very stylized tap dancer. Big personality. He was just had a very big personality. So it came out through his dance, a lot of arms, just very, very stylized tap.
Like when people think of the Nicholas brothers, other than the crazy
I would
feats,
say like
body
maybe
movement.
like maybe a little cross between the Nicholas brothers. He wasn't that acrobatic,
or
at least not that I know of. Maybe when he was younger, maybe a cross. And there were probably a lot of influences for him, like the Nicholas brothers, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly. Gene Kelly a lot. Gene Kelly was very stylized. Gene Kelly had a lot of jazz in his tap.
In his tap.
And I think my father did also. Yeah.
So what would you, or just what are some of your thoughts about, again, I wanted to dance like everybody I saw, like whoever was popular or whoever I connected with, I wanted to dance like them until I got to the point where I started to find my own style. So what are your thoughts about dancers all dancing like everybody else that's around them versus finding their own style?
Well, I think that, like you said, first and foremost, you're a tap dancer. And so you have to get the techniques, you have to learn the basics, you have to, learn how to tap dance. But then as you evolve and you just want to be like somebody else, well, that somebody else is already doing that.
Exactly.
So if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But if you want to stand out, then you need to develop your own style.
Okay.
And then, we just have to realize as a tap community that there is room for all these different styles. And it doesn't just have to be one particular style of tap.
Amen. I take your point. But yeah, because when I think about the legends and the history, none of them dance alike.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, that was a problem. If any other dancer did a sand dance, Sandman had a problem. If anybody else did a stair dance, Bojangles had a problem. And I mean, gun and badge in the back hallway problem. Like
and they each had their own, their own appeal, their own, type, their own gimmick, so to speak,
Yeah.
And I think, that is still needed today because we don't need 50 Savions.
Right.
Savion is all by himself.
Is Savion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think he and yourself and, would concur that, you just need to bring out that individual style.
Who you are.
Yes.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to end this conversation on. Be your own person, develop your own style. You can't just be the best you that you can be.
Exactly.
And know that there's room for it all.
Yes.
So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Miss Peggy Sutton, who came in here and dropped the knowledge on us all. And stay tuned for the next episode of Living Legacy Conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure having
Thank you.
And I'm just going to take this.
Keep tap alive.